The briefing room fell silent as Captain Zex finished reading the mission parameters. Every alien cadet in the Galactic Military Academy stared at their holographic displays, calculations running through their advanced neural processors. The Void Crawler infiltration was considered the most dangerous training exercise in the known galaxy. 2%, whispered Cadet Vrack, his tentacles trembling slightly. The mollusk species were known for their mathematical precision, and when a mollusk calculated odds, everyone listened. 2% survival rate, confirmed Captain Zex, his 4 eyes scanning the room. This exercise has claimed the lives of 98% of all participants over the past century. The remaining 2% barely escaped with their sanity intact. That's when Cadet Riley Chen raised her hand. The captain's mandibles clicked in annoyance. Humans were still considered a novelty in the Academy, having only joined the Galactic Federation 5 years ago. Most faculty viewed them as adorable but ultimately inadequate creatures who somehow managed to stumble their way into space travel. Yes, Cadet Chen? Riley stood up, her brown eyes sparkling with something that made several alien cadets unconsciously step back. Sir, you mentioned a 2% survival chance. What exactly am I supposed to do with the other 98%? The room erupted in confused chatter. Cadet Thorne, a massive crystalline being, let out what passed for laughter among the species. Human humor is so primitive. She clearly doesn't understand basic mathematics. Captain Zex raised a claw for silence. Cadet Chen, I believe you misunderstood the briefing. The 2% represents your likelihood of survival. The 98% represents, well, death. Riley's grin widened. Oh, I understood perfectly, sir. I'm just wondering if I can use that 98% for something productive. Maybe redecorate the training facility? I've always thought this place could use more color. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the Academy's environmental systems seemed to pause in bewilderment. This is not a joke, human, snarled Cadet Vex, a reptilian Draknari whose species prided themselves on military prowess. The Void Crawler scenario involves navigating through an abandoned space station infested with synthetic predators designed to test every aspect of combat, survival, and tactical thinking. Most cadets don't even make it past the first chamber. Riley nodded thoughtfully. So, basically it's Tuesday? Tuesday? Captain Zex's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Yeah, Tuesday. You know, that day where everything goes wrong but you got coffee in spite to keep you going. Riley's voice carried a casual confidence that seemed to physically disturb her classmates. Back on Earth, we call that Tuesday. Cadet Nira, an ethereal being whose species communicated primarily through telepathy, suddenly recoiled. Her translucent form flickered as she spoke aloud. Captain, I attempted to read her thoughts to understand this human's bravado. There's something very wrong in there. Define wrong, Captain Zex demanded. She's genuinely excited. Not nervous, not scared, not even mildly concerned. She's planning strategies for scenarios that haven't even been described yet. And, sir? Nira's voice dropped to a whisper. She's already identified 17 ways to weaponize the ventilation system. All eyes turned back to Riley, who was now examining her fingernails with theatrical boredom. Look, I appreciate the whole dramatic build-up thing you got going here. Very cinematic. But are we actually going to do this exercise, or are we going to keep standing around discussing statistics like we're planning a corporate merger? Captain Zex's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. Very well, Cadet Chen. Since you seem so eager, you'll be the first to enter the Void Crawler scenario. Alone. Finally, Riley muttered, grabbing her equipment pack. I was starting to think this academy was all talk and no action. As she headed toward the exit, Cadet Vrack called out, Human, you do realize that the last cadet who attempted the scenario solo was found 3 days later, catatonic and muttering about shadow creatures that could smell fear? Riley paused at the doorway and looked back with a smile that would have made a predator nervous. That's his problem. Shadow creatures can't smell anything when they're on fire. The transport ship to the training station was cramped, designed for smaller alien physiology. Riley squeezed into the pilot seat and began the pre-flight sequence, while Captain Zex's voice crackled through the communication system. Cadet Chun, once you dock with the training station, you'll have 72 hours to complete the objective. retrieve the data core from the station's central hub, and return to your ship. The synthetic predators have been programmed with the collective combat data of over 300 species. They adapt, they learn, and they show no mercy. Got it, Riley replied, flipping switches with practiced ease. Question, though. These synthetic predators, do they have feelings? Feelings? No. They're artificial constructs designed purely for hunting and elimination. Perfect. I hate when my enemies have emotional baggage. Makes the whole killing thing awkward. There was a long pause before Captain Zex responded. Cadet, perhaps we should reconsider this exercise. Your psychological profile suggests. My psychological profile suggests I'm unstable, vengeful, and have an unhealthy relationship with dangerous situations, Riley interrupted cheerfully. The psychologists weren't wrong. They were just thinking too small. The training station loomed ahead, a massive derelict structure floating in the void. Its hull was scarred and pitted, giving it the appearance of something that had survived multiple battles, which Riley realized it probably had. Initiating docking sequence, she announced, guiding her ship toward the station's docking bay. You know, Captain, I've been thinking about something. What's that, Cadet? You mentioned that 98% of cadets don't survive this exercise. But here's the thing that's bothering me. If the survival rate is so low, why do you keep running it? Captain Zex's response was immediate. Because the 2% who do survive become the finest military officers in the galaxy. They're tested beyond their limits and emerge stronger. Riley's ship connected with the docking clamps with a satisfying thunk. Or, she said, powering down the engines, you're just really bad at designing training exercises. Excuse me? Think about it. Any training program with a 98% failure rate isn't testing excellence. It's testing luck. And lucky soldiers die in real combat. Riley gathered her equipment and headed for the airlock. But don't worry, Captain. I'm about to give you some real data on what happens when you send someone into your scenario who doesn't rely on luck. The airlock hissed open, revealing the darkened interior of the training station. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow, and the air carried the metallic scent of recycled atmosphere mixed with something else, something organic. Systems check complete, Riley announced, stepping into the station. Artificial gravity functional, atmosphere breathable, and I can already hear something skittering around in the ventilation system. This is either going to be very fun or very messy. Cadet Chun, please remember that this exercise is being monitored and recorded. Your performance will be evaluated based on tactical thinking, resource management, and adaptability under pressure. Riley pulled out her sidearm and checked the charge. Captain, you're about to learn why humans don't have a 98% failure rate in anything. We have a 100% success rate in making our problems into someone else's problems. She began moving through the station's corridors, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The walls were lined with viewing ports that showed nothing but the empty void of space, and doorways led off in multiple directions. According to her mission briefing, the data core was located 17 levels up in the station's central command center. First synthetic contact expected in 3, 2, 1. Something dropped from the ceiling directly in front of her. It was sleek, metallic, with multiple limbs that ended in razor-sharp claws. Its optical sensors locked onto Riley with predatory focus. "Oh, hello there," Riley said conversationally. "You must be one of those synthetic predators I've heard so much about. I have to say, your designers did excellent work. Very intimidating, very lethal looking." The creature tilted its head, processing her words. Its programming hadn't prepared it for casual conversation. "Here's the thing, though," Riley continued, slowly reaching into her equipment pack. "I've been dealing with predators my whole life. Earth is basically a giant ball of things trying to eat other things. And humans? We're the things that figured out how to eat everything else." The synthetic predator lunged forward with lightning speed. Riley sidestepped and threw something small and round directly into its path. The creature's momentum carried it straight into the object, which exploded on contact. "Homemade flashbang," Riley explained to the smoking, twitching remains. I made it during the transport flight. Amazing what you can do with a few basic chemicals and some spare time. She continued down the corridor, stepping over the destroyed synthetic. Captain, I'm updating the mission log. First contact eliminated. Moving to secondary objectives. How did you? Captain Zex's voice was filled with disbelief. That creature was designed to be faster than any known organic reaction time. Oh, it was plenty fast, Riley agreed, entering what appeared to be a cafeteria area. But speed doesn't matter if you're predictable. It saw me as prey, so it attacked in the most efficient manner possible. Straight line, maximum velocity, minimal deviation, textbook predator behavior. And you anticipated this? Captain, on Earth we have creatures called house cats. They're about this big. Riley held up her hand to indicate a small size, and they're basically miniature killing machines. Every human child learns to read predator behavior before they can tie their shoes. It's a survival skill. She paused at the cafeteria entrance, examining the room beyond. Tables and chairs were scattered about, some overturned, others arranged in defensive positions. Claw marks scored the walls, and dark stains covered portions of the floor. Previous cadets made a stand here, Riley observed. Probably thought the open space would give them tactical advantage. Poor planning. What would you have done differently? I wouldn't have stopped here at all. Open spaces are kill zones, not defensive positions. You want to control the engagement. You funnel your enemy into spaces where their advantages become disadvantages. Riley moved through the cafeteria quickly, staying close to the walls. Basic asymmetric warfare. A section of the ceiling exploded downward as 3 more synthetic predators dropped into the room. They spread out immediately, cutting off Riley's exit routes and forcing her toward the center of the space. Now, this is interesting, Riley mused, pulling out what looked like a standard emergency flare. Coordinated attack pattern. Someone upgraded your AI since the last mission briefing. The predators close in from 3 different angles, their movements perfectly synchronized. Riley waited until they were almost within striking distance, then activated the flare and threw it high into the air. The room filled with brilliant red light and acrid smoke. The synthetic predator's optical sensors immediately began adjusting to compensate, cycling through different spectrums to maintain target acquisition, which was exactly what Riley had been counting on. She moved through the smoke like a ghost, using the brief moment of sensor adjustment to stay in their blind spots. Her sidearm fired 3 times in rapid succession, each shot perfectly placed to disable the creature's primary motor functions. When the smoke cleared, all 3 synthetic predators were motionless on the floor, their optical sensors dark. Sensor overload. Riley explained to the stunned silence on the communication channel. Their adaptive programming made them vulnerable to sensory manipulation. The more they tried to compensate for the flare, the more processing power they devoted to visual input, left them wide open to targeted electronic warfare. Electronic warfare? Captain Zex's voice was barely a whisper. Those were standard training weapons. They don't have electronic warfare capabilities. Riley held up her sidearm, which now had several additional components jury-rigged to its power cell. They do now. It took me about 15 minutes during the transport flight to modify the energy output. Instead of just firing plasma bursts, it can now emit targeted electromagnetic pulses. She headed toward the cafeteria's exit, stepping over the disabled predators. You know what your problem is, Captain? You're thinking like a military academy. All rules and regulations and approved equipment lists. But real warfare isn't about following the rules. It's about making the other guy follow your rules. This is highly irregular. Cadet Chun, modifying training equipment without authorization is exactly what any competent soldier would do in a real combat situation, Riley interrupted. Unless you're planning to send your graduates into battle with strongly worded memos and official protocols. She reached a maintenance access panel and pried it open with her combat knife. Inside was a maze of conduits and control systems, all labeled in the standard Galactic Federation technical language. Found the station's environmental controls, she announced. Give me a few minutes to introduce some chaos into their systems. Cadet, what are you planning? Riley's hands moved quickly over control interfaces, her human adaptability allowing her to understand the alien technology far faster than her academy instructors had expected. "I'm evening the odds. Your synthetic predators are designed to hunt individual targets." Warning lights began flashing throughout the station as Riley's modifications took effect. The gravity fluctuated, cycling between normal and zero-G in random intervals. The atmospheric processors began introducing trace amounts of various gases that would interfere with electronic sensors. The lighting system started strobing in patterns designed to trigger seizure responses in most known species. "What have you done?" Captain Zex demanded. "I've turned your hunting ground into my hunting ground," Riley replied with satisfaction. The synthetic predators were designed to be superior to organic life forms in every measurable way. But they can't adapt to chaos the way organic minds can. They need predictable parameters to function efficiently. She sealed the access panel and continued toward the central elevator shaft. And chaos, Captain, is what humans do best. The elevator was, predictably, not functioning. Riley examined the shaft and noted the emergency ladder that ran along one wall. 17 levels up, in fluctuating gravity, while being hunted by adaptive synthetic predators who were now dealing with a constantly changing environment. "This," she said with genuine enthusiasm, "is going to be fun." Hashtag they gave a human cadet a 2% survival chance. She asked what she'd do with the other 98% HFY. The elevator shaft was a vertical nightmare of twisted metal and emergency lighting that flickered between blinding brightness and complete darkness. Riley began her climb just as the gravity switched to zero-G, making her first few steps feel like floating through a mechanical forest. "Cadet Chen, be advised that 17 additional synthetic predators have been activated in response to the environmental changes." Captain Zex's voice crackled through the communication system. "They're converging on your position." "Only 17? Riley asked, pulling herself up the emergency ladder as gravity suddenly returned, slamming her against the rungs. "I'm insulted. Back on Earth, we call 17 opponents a warm-up exercise. This is not a joking matter. These units have been programmed with updated tactical protocols, specifically designed to counter your unconventional approach." Riley laughed, a sound that echoed eerily through the shaft. "Captain, you just made a classic mistake. You assumed that humans fight conventionally at all. We don't. We're the species that looked at every rule of warfare, threw them out the window, and then set the window on fire for good measure." She reached the third level and paused to examine the shaft door. Through the small viewing port, she could see synthetic predators moving to the corridors beyond, their optical sensors sweeping back and forth in search patterns. They moved differently now, more cautiously, adapting to the environmental chaos she'd introduced. "Interesting," she murmured. "They're learning. That's actually impressive. And completely irrelevant." Riley pulled a small device from her equipment pack and attached it to the door's locking mechanism. After a few seconds, the door slid open silently. She slipped through and immediately pressed herself against the wall as a synthetic predator glided past. Its sensors focused on the areas ahead, rather than checking for threats from behind. "Poor design choice," she whispered. "All that advanced technology, and they forgot the most basic rule of survival. Always check your six." She followed the creature down the corridor, staying in its sensor-blind spot. When it paused to investigate what appeared to be movement in a side passage, Riley struck. Her modified sidearm discharged directly into the base of the creature's central processor, sending electromagnetic feedback through its entire system. The predator collapsed without a sound, smoke rising from its optical arrays. Lesson 2. Riley announced to the communication channel. Predators become prey the moment they stop expecting to be hunted. How are you tracking them so effectively? Captain Zex asked. Their stealth capabilities should make them nearly invisible to human senses. Should is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, Captain. Riley dragged the disabled predator into an alcove and began stripping useful components from its frame. See, your designers made another assumption. They assumed human senses work like everybody else's. She held up a small sensor array she'd removed from the creature. Humans don't just see in the visual spectrum. We see patterns. We see inconsistencies. We see the spaces between what should be there and what is there. Your stealth technology makes these things invisible to direct observation, but it can't hide the fact that they displace air, generate heat signatures, and create micro-vibrations when they move. That's impossible. No organic species has ever demonstrated the ability to hunt invisible predators? Riley interrupted, continuing her climb up the emergency ladder. Captain, humans spent 200,000 years as persistence hunters on a planet where almost everything was bigger, stronger, and meaner than we were. We didn't survive by being the apex predator. We survived by being too stubborn to die and too clever to fight fair. The gravity fluctuated again, and Riley used the zero-G moment to launch herself up several levels at once, grabbing the ladder rungs as normal gravity returned. Above her, she could hear the distinctive sound of synthetic predators repositioning themselves, their claws scraping against metal as they prepare to drop down the shaft. "They're trying to box you in," Captain Zex warned. "Multiple units above and below your position." "I know," Riley replied cheerfully. "I've been herding them into position for the last 10 minutes. Herding them. Basic misdirection. I made noise in specific locations, left heat signatures in predictable patterns, and generally behaved like a panicked cadet trying to reach the objective as quickly as possible." Riley reached into her pack and pulled out what looked like a standard emergency beacon. "Meanwhile, I've been placing these little surprises throughout the shaft." She activated the device and tossed it upward. It landed on a support beam 3 levels up and immediately began emitting a low-frequency pulse. "Resonance generator," Riley explained. "I built it from spare parts during my climb. It's currently broadcasting a frequency that matches the harmonic resonance of the synthetic predator's internal stabilization systems." The effect was immediate and dramatic. The creatures above her began losing coordination, their movement becoming erratic as their internal gyroscopes struggled to compensate for the interference. One lost its grip entirely and fell past Riley, crashing into the shaft wall with a shower of nanoparticles, Riley explained. "They interfere with optical sensors and create false heat signatures. The predators down there are now hunting shadows, while their targeting systems try to lock onto thermal ghosts." Captain Zex's voice was barely audible over the sound of synthetic predators falling and crashing throughout the shaft. "How did you plan this?" "About 30 seconds after you told me the survival rate was 2%. Riley resumed her climb, stepping over disabled predators with casual indifference. "See, Captain, you told me I had a 98% chance of failure. But what you didn't consider is that humans have spent our entire evolutionary history proving statistics wrong." She reached the 10th level and paused to check the corridor beyond. It was empty, but she could hear movement from the levels above. The remaining predators were consolidating their positions, adapting to her tactics. "They're learning faster than expected," she observed. "Someone really did upgrade their AI. That's going to make the final approach interesting." Riley opened the shaft door and stepped into the corridor. Unlike the lower levels, this area showed signs of recent activity. Blast marks scored the walls, and several emergency bulkheads had been sealed. She could see where previous cadets had made their last stands. "Level 10 is where most attempts end." Captain Zex's voice had taken on a somber tone. "The synthetic predators become more aggressive as targets approach the objective. The psychological pressure often causes cadets to make fatal mistakes." "Psychological pressure," Riley repeated thoughtfully. "You mean fear?" "Among other factors, yes." Riley examined the blast marks more closely. They showed a pattern of defensive fire, cadets shooting at approaching threats while backing toward sealed positions. Classic panic response. "Here's something your academy psychologists probably didn't mention in their reports about humans," she said. "We have a very different relationship with fear than most species." "Different how?" "Hello there," Riley said politely. "I don't suppose you'd be willing to step aside and let me grab that data core?" "No, I didn't think so." The Guardian's weapon systems activated, multiple targeting lasers, painting Riley's position. She had perhaps 2 seconds before it opened fire with enough firepower to reduce her to component atoms. Riley smiled and activated the device she'd built in the elevator. Nothing happened. The Guardian fired, its weapons unleashing a concentrated barrage that should have ended the exercise immediately. but the energy beams passed harmlessly through empty air. Riley was no longer where she'd been standing. Holographic projector. Her voice echoed from somewhere in the command center. I built it from the optical sensors of your destroyed predators. It's been displaying a false image of my position, while I moved to a more advantageous location. The Guardian sensors swept the room, searching for the real target. Its thermal imaging detected multiple heat signatures. Its motion sensors registered movement in 6 different directions, and its audio pickups were receiving Riley's voice from multiple points simultaneously. The problem with being designed to be undefeatable, Riley's voice continued, is that you become predictable. All your responses are optimized for victory, which means you can't adapt when victory becomes impossible. The Guardian spun in place, firing at ghost images and false signatures. Its tactical processors were overloading trying to track a target that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. You see, I didn't build a distraction, Riley said, appearing directly behind a massive construct. I built a confusion matrix. Every sensor input you're receiving is false. Every target you're tracking is a lie. And while you're trying to process impossible data, her modified sidearm discharged directly into the Guardian's central processor core, sending cascading electromagnetic feedback through its entire system. The massive construct seized, sparked, and collapsed with a sound like thunder. I've been standing right behind you for the last 30 seconds, Riley finished, walking toward the data core. The command center fell silent, except for the soft humming of the data core and the occasional spark from the disabled Guardian. Riley approached the central terminal and began the download sequence. Mission objective complete, she announced. Data core secured. Estimated time for extraction, 5 minutes. Captain Zex's voice was barely a whisper. How? How what, Captain? How did you all of it? The tactics, the improvised weapons, the complete disregard for your own safety. How is any of this possible? Riley checked the download progress and settled back against the terminal. Captain, you've been thinking about this all wrong. You keep asking how it's possible for a human to have a 98% success rate in a scenario designed to be impossible. Yes, but you're asking the wrong question. The right question is, why did you think it was impossible in the first place? Riley's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. Did you really believe that any training scenario could be designed that would consistently defeat every possible approach? The statistical analysis showed what happened when you tested creatures who thought like you do, logical, predictable, following established protocols and tactical doctrines. Riley stood as the download completed, removing the data core from its housing. But humans don't follow established anything, Captain. We're the species that looked at every rule and asked, what if we did the opposite? She headed back toward the elevator, stepping over the disabled Guardian. Your 2% survival rate wasn't measuring the difficulty of the scenario. It was measuring the failure of imagination of your test subjects. But the predators were specifically designed to hunt and kill efficiently, yes. But efficiency requires predictability. And predictability is the one thing humans absolutely refuse to provide. Riley entered the elevator and began her descent. We're the species that turned warfare into an art form, Captain. Not because we're naturally violent, but because we're naturally creative. The elevator reached the docking level, and Riley made her way back through the station. The corridors were littered with the remains of synthetic predators, each one disabled by tactics that no military manual had ever described. Cadet Chen, Captain Zex's voice had taken on a different tone. I need to ask you something. Go ahead. When you asked about the other 98%, were you serious? Riley paused at the airlock to her ship, considering the question. Captain, let me put this in perspective for you. You designed a training scenario that was supposed to be unsurvivable. You filled it with predators that were supposed to be undefeatable. You created conditions that were supposed to be impossible to overcome. She opened the airlock and stepped onto her ship, and it took me less than 3 hours to turn your nightmare scenario into target practice. So, yes, I was serious about the other 98%. I could probably redecorate this entire station and still have enough left over to reorganize your filing system. The ship's engines powered up as Riley prepared for departure. Through the viewports, she could see the training station slowly rotating against a backdrop of stars. "Captain, I have a suggestion for your academy." "What's that, Cadet?" "Stop designing scenarios to test what cadets can't do. Start designing scenarios to discover what they can do. Because if there's one thing humans have proven throughout history, it's that impossible is just another word for hasn't been tried yet." Riley's ship detached from the station and began its journey back to the academy. Behind her, the Void Crawler training facility continued its slow rotation, its corridors now filled with the remains of predators that had learned too late that humans don't follow the rules. "Final mission log," Riley announced. "Objective completed. All synthetic predators neutralized. Station environmental systems restored to normal parameters. Total mission time, 2 hours and 47 minutes. She paused, then added with a grin that would have made her instructors very nervous. "I spent the extra 13 minutes seeing if I could reprogram the Guardian unit to make coffee. Turns out I could. It makes excellent coffee." Captain Zex's response was a long moment of stunned silence, followed by what sounded suspiciously like alien laughter. "Cadet Chun, report to my office immediately upon return. We need to discuss your new assignment." "New assignment?" "Someone needs to redesign our training scenarios. And I have a feeling you're going to have some very interesting ideas about what constitutes adequate preparation for military service." Riley leaned back in the pilot's seat, watching the academy grow larger in the viewports ahead. "Captain, you have no idea." As her ship approached